that little thing.
Well, thank you so much
that
for being here tonight.
zero
We had a lot of good discussion last couple weeks ago when we talked about love and logic parenting. And the reason love and logic parenting was developed, and I'm not sure if I gave you much background last time, but it was developed in 1979 by two doctors, psychologists who were working with kids and trying to figure out how do we grow up kids who are responsible, make good decisions. How do we eliminate some of the arguing and chaos that's really normal in most of our homes? Because kids are kids and adults are adults, and we get busy and we get tired, and our kids know just how to push all of our buttons. So this was developed. So when I go through some of the scenarios and scenarios, just kind of examples, a lot of them are by doctors. Sometimes I'll bring in some scenarios that were my own children. I'm a mother of 5 and a grandmother to 1. My youngest 2 are in high school, so I've been through I've been through the little bits, and now I've got teenagers and college students, and so this has helped me tremendously, and it was introduced to me when my youngest daughter, who's 16 now, was in 6th grade. So we've had a much better junior high and high school knowing the information that I know now. So just asking a question from last week, did anybody try some of those statements? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did, because she's like, there's a lot going on right now. And so I'll talk to her kind of hard, not all the time, but I've been trying to be softer, talking more what you suggested.
Try to create a dialogue,
Right.
And
this has been helpful.
Good.
She says, "Mommy, you like so nice today." I'm like, okay. But anyway,
Good.
I'm using those.
Good. I think if we can stop our children from begging us, begging, and getting on us, it's just one of the benefits of this program. Today we're going to talk about setting limits without waging wars. And that is, waging war, yes. That is so important. And I want to give you an example that's from the book that's kind of a funny example. Say the wife comes home and she's just got a speeding ticket. And the husband says to her, "Oh, honey, that must make you really feel bad. I love you so much, but, that's really hard that you got a ticket and that sort of thing." And so that would be a pretty good response, don't you think? The wife's going to feel like she's still loved. She made a mistake, but she's still loved. And then he says to her, "But you know that match-up thing?" She's like, "What are you talking about?" "You know the match-up thing where you match up the speed limit on the side of the road to what your car's going? You match those up.
Like a Bel Air.
Well, you don't get a ticket, right? If it's 55 and you match it up on your speedometer. Well, how do you think that went over with his wife?
She probably went off.
Right. So, and why do you think she was angry? And do you think she didn't know that?
Preoccupied.
Right. But do you think she didn't know what the speed limit was? Right. So we do that same thing to our kids. There's something they do wrong, and we say to them, "Well, don't you know? You can't, you're not supposed to take that out of the classroom," and we go off on them. Well, they know those things, right? And so when we teach them, like we talked about last week, when we talk about consequences, we want our children to live up to the consequences. Okay, so you took that home from school and you weren't supposed to. Tomorrow the consequences are, you're going to long form, a short form, or whatever the teachers do, or whatever the issue is with them, and you let that go. Because when we constantly lecture them and tell them, "Oh, you did it wrong, you did it wrong, you did it wrong, you know you did it wrong, I can't believe you did it again," we are telling them they're not smart enough to make a good decision. Do we want to be telling them that? No. We just are making our point. But when we keep going on and on and on, we're telling them they're not smart enough to make a decision. They can't figure it out. But do we want our kids to make a decision? Do we want to make them good decisions? And we want them to figure it out? So don't we need to give them confidence? So think about that sometimes when we are trying to, as I beat a dead horse, when we're trying to lecture. And sometimes with their consequences, they're going to make the mistake over and over and over. And maybe they're going to stay in from recess over and over and over. Or you're going to take their phone over and over and over. But you take it, they know that's the consequences, and you move on. So I think that's a great way to teach your child to, you provide them consequences, but you provide them in a loving environment to suffer those consequences in. Because at the end of the line, as we talked about last week, when our kids go off to college, the consequences are a lot bigger than they are now. Or even when they're in high school and they have an opportunity to be in somebody else's car. So if we can tell them, making good decisions now about the friends they choose, suffer the consequences of a friend who's really nice to you one day, stabs you in the back the next day. Instead of lecturing you, I should have told you so, honey, I love you a lot. I love you whoever your friends are, and you move on. The visual, well, we can open your, let's see, we've got our visuals on the top here. So that's kind of the first little, and we've got a lot to cover, so I'll go really quickly. But if you have any questions or any comments or anything you want to add, please don't hesitate to break in and let me, let's chat about it.
Question.
Oh, no, she just needs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Two.
Okay, so our first, the consequences lose their power when, on visual 1, if we're trying to get even with our kid. If we're trying to get even with them, I told you so with our kid, the consequences they're not going to be paying attention. If we're anger, frustration, or sarcasm, the consequences they're not going to be listening to you. Or repeated lectures or warnings. We know as adults, if you've got a boss who just keeps do this and and after a while, you're tuning them out. Our kids are tuning us out. They're not thinking about the consequences they're suffering. They're like, so what? Mom and dad are gone. Or we don't suffer the consequences if we feel sorry for our children and give in. And that means that they're, if you said be home by 10 and they come home at 10:30, and you're like, oh, well, no big deal. I'm sorry, sweetie, and da-da-da-da-da. You have to stay firm with your consequences. That's how we all learn, right? And so in visual 3.2 just tells us what we're going to talk more about tonight. And I know you love visual 3.3, but we'll get that to the minute. All right. The next part of this is making your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And I think some of us grew up with parents who did that. Do you know? You had parents that when they said yes, you did when they said go and they said stop, you stopped and went immediately. Doesn't seem like that's what's going on with our kids, does it? I don't know where it all changed and how it all changed, but we don't need to be the drill sergeant, as they call it, with yes meaning yes and no meaning no, and you've got to do everything I say and right now, because that doesn't teach our child to make any decisions also. But we need to make sure that they know we mean what we're going to say. Neutralizing your arguing with actions. And I know for an example, I know we've all seen this mom at Target. Her child's asking for something. Mom, can I have this toy? Mom, can I have this toy? No. Can I have this toy? No. Can I have this toy? No. Pretty soon, their voices are a little bit louder, and maybe the child is screaming now and taking the toy, and he throws it in the cart, and mom takes it out, and it's a huge, big scene. And mom has totally lost control of this situation, and you've seen her lose control of this situation. And maybe your child has put you in that situation. And then the next thing the child does is the mom says, put it back, and says, that sucks. You suck. Well, the mom then is totally lost it because you're not talking to me like that. Now it's not just about the toy. It's about the child calling names, and she's mortified in this situation. So then what does mom say? Or that statement we love to use when we've just about lost control? I mean it. I mean it. We've lost control, and all of a sudden our statement, we've been yelling, stop, 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 stop for now, and all of a sudden, I mean it. Don't do it anymore, I mean it. Well, then what does the child do? Whether they're laughing inside or outside, they know that that's when mom is the end. The I mean it comes out when you've lost total control. And you're just like, I'm picking up this kid and we're leaving here. So if you're coming into this class and you've experienced something like that, or you know somebody who has a neighbor child, you need to think about how do we have our yes mean yes and our no mean no. How do we change this situation at the store? Or where is it that you take your child that there's one more thing they always want? You have to come back. You have to have a plan. So if your child if Target's their point, or if it's McDonald's or something, where you go and your child always, you and your child lose control. You know, where is that point? And you have to think about what you're going to do. So if you're that mom and you're headed to the store and you tell your child, you set the ground rule before you go. I'm going to Target today. You are welcome to go with me as long as you don't cause a problem. And you know, it may sound silly, but you know, I would take my child to the store and I will say to her, you're welcome to go to the store with me today, but I will not be buying you anything. We're going grocery shopping or we're going here. So you're welcome to go with me. I'm not buying you anything, and we'll go to the store. But, so if you say that going in, what are you going to do when you get there and your child all of a sudden sees this candy or a balloon or whatever it is they want, and they ask you for it. You say no, and you say, you know, you remind them, I said we would go to the store if this was going to be, if you didn't cause a problem. So the child causes a problem, you leave the store. But here's the kicker with that one. And I'm going to give you a little bit different strategy. You're someplace where you need to be. You need to be at the grocery store and you need to get your shopping done, correct? So if you leave the store, if that's where you are, is that a big deal?
Yes.
Is it a big deal to your child?
No.
So where do you take your child to teach them that your yes means yes and your no means no?
Aisle 5.
Where would you take them that they would not want to leave?
I did it the other day.
What'd you do?
I went to Taco Cabana in Pearland. I was tasting the margarita before I got out of the car. She loves the flowers. She got in there and did what I told her not to do. And we walked out and she did it right there. That's okay.
That's perfectly okay. That's exactly what we want them to know, that so the next time she's going to think about it. If she wants, the flautas, she wants those, and you turn around and walk out. A lot of times as parents, we can't turn around and walk out, or we don't because it's someplace we need to be. I know. So you try, next time you'll have it because you've taught her that that's not appropriate behavior. And that's one of these love and logic things. So one of the dads in the scenario said he took his kids to Chuck E. Cheese. And he said, we'll go to Chuck E. Cheese as long as you behave and don't cause a problem to anyone around you. Well, he got in there, before you know it, somebody was climbing on chairs and interrupting the other guests, and he turned around and picked up his kids and left. Now, you know the impact on them is going to be a lot greater if you remove them from someplace where they want to be. We're at a ball game. You know, you're not going to behave, we're leaving. We're wherever you know.
It's free or not. So if you're in a situation where you can't leave, what do you do? If you're in this, I don't want to leave the grocery store because you asked me for something. So what do I do if I'm in a situation where I can't leave?
I think strategy first is try to teach them your yes means yes and your no means no prior to the grocery store. So maybe in another example, you know, another situation where you could leave. And sometimes it takes creative parenting. You know, they teach a lot in Love and Logic. Do you have a strategy and you're talking to your mom and your sister and say, okay, I'm at Target and I'm going to leave. Hey, hang out behind the clothes section. When I leave and the child wants to stay there, you watch that child. You know, you have a strategy. How are you going to make this work? You know, I'm going to leave the grocery store. I'm going to sit you outside, not by yourself. But I'm saying you have a friend, if you partner up with a friend and say, I'm trying to teach my child a lesson, and we need, you know, sometimes you think, I've got this all under control. I can parent all by myself. But, you know, if we do need backup. You know, we have, in our communities before, we had a lot of backup with our moms and then our sisters and our neighbors. And now we all kind of live all over the place, and we don't have a lot of backup. So pull out your girlfriends, and none of us want to see our kids freaking out. We all want to go to the store and say, no, and if you behave this time, you know, let's save up our money and let's buy a toy, or let's have a plan down the road. But let's figure out how we can teach that lesson so that when we walk in the store, just like when he walked into Taco Cabana, your child knows that if I freak out, we're all leaving. Yes, sir.
Is it designed to work with our kids of all ages? Because it sounds to me like it's
Because I have some kids, man, they gonna let you know what their rights are and what they ain't. You know, and what rights they have and don't. And so, like, I deal with them a lot of times. I try to create a good quality of life for them. But I will buy artichoke hearts, spinach, asparagus, and I'll buy different foods that I know they don't eat. I'll cook them and serve them. You know, I like them, I eat them, you know. And so they'll be looking at me like, I know he didn't buy it, I know he didn't serve it. And they be threatening to call somebody on me here and the other. I said, well, what they gonna do? They gonna say a well-prepared, nutritious meal. You know what I'm saying? They get mad and they be calling everybody.
I would set up, you want a strategy, I would set up with somebody they don't know. And they start calling you and you say, go right ahead. I think the number on my phone says Child Protective Services. If anybody's been close to that knows they don't want to threaten that. But you know, you come up with a strategy and you have a friend knock on the door and say, you know, guys, I think you want to go. You know, you come up with a plan. You think that this is not good? Well, let's, you know, and you can, I mean, I think the fear factor in them, but it's a strategy because if your kids think that they can threaten you with CPS custody or somebody calling the police.
And the spanking thing, I was under the impression that you can't whoop your kid, but you can spank your children. I had somebody from the special victim unit, I was referred to them to get information on spanking and its appropriateness and where to and how to. And he explained it to me in front of them. He let them know, don't think you can't get no blood whooping because this is the rules and the regulations and how you can apply the blood whooping. So they stopped believing I can't whoop their butt. You know, so, but I try not to do that. I mess with other, you know, I yank all the cords out the wall or go electronics with the blood up. And I go to the grocery store, I buy stuff that I know they don't like to eat. But I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I'll cook it, it was like something on TV. You know what I'm saying? You don't like it, hey, you don't have to eat it.
When we have to, yeah, and the key thing is that we want to have a relationship with our child. So that's the bottom line. The reason we want them to make good decisions and the reason we want to teach with love and logic is we really want a relationship with them down the road. We want them to ask us up in junior high and high school. We want them to ask us things when they get to college. So we have to draw a line in the sand at some point and say, these are the behaviors that are appropriate, and you'll be able to play with game blocks when I see that your behaviors are appropriate. Not in 2 weeks, not in a month, but when I see your behaviors are appropriate. You don't have to give your child a timeline. If you put them in timeout, you know, you don't have to say, you say you're in there until you can remain calm. Well, if you're not going to calm down for 15 minutes, you're going to stay in there until you can remain calm. So we don't have to, you know, I think we're guideline. We have to do this, and we have to, if you're grounded, we have to say you're grounded for 2 weeks. No, you're grounded until I see your behavior change. You're the adult, and your child feels the most safe and secure when they've got loving boundaries around them. And when they don't, they feel like they're not quite sure what to expect from you. It doesn't make them secure as much as they pretend that they don't want that. So good questions. Yes, ma'am.
When it comes to mom and dad, like I'm the warden, okay?
Mhm.
Dad's the marshal.
Okay.
So when I lay down the law, you know, kind of, you know, goes up and down, but then it causes problems for our relationship because I said no, and he's like, oh, I'm like, I said no.
And I think that our little people start when they're 2 and all the way up until
How
they're
do you
adult.
know
We ask
that?
mom and we ask dad. We know which things mom's going to give in on,
He's
and
a
we
sucker,
know
and
which
I'm not.
things dad's going to give on. So I think
It's a girl.
if you can come to an agreement with your partner, and sometimes that means you giving up some of the control in some things and him taking a stronger stand on some. A united front
So
is
how do you
always the most
present that
secure.
to the daddy? You know, daddy's like, you need to go ahead, you know, and so we just go.
I think what you need to, it probably needs to be presented when the situation is not happening. When you're having a nice dinner out and you're chatting and saying, I want to bring up something that's concerning to me. When neither of you are within the situation. And you don't want to argue about it in front of your child because that gives your child an insecurity. When our parents aren't united, they're always, you know, it can
That
give them a
does
sense
work
of
because
security.
I did that. I've done that, and I'm like, okay, listen, I need to talk to her when she goes to bed or whatever. I said, this is good. So it's been helping because when we're not in the midst of the issue, I'm
think that's the key. I mean, the key is with our kids is seeing a united front, and if we can do that with our spouse, but you know, dad and moms, and sometimes mom doesn't know what dad said, dad doesn't know what mom said, and then there's
They do it on purpose.
Well, I don't know.
They got it.
Manipulative children.
Yeah.
You go ask him what I said.
all right. The next statement we're going to go to. The next thing we're going to go to is we're going to talk about enforceable statements, and that's going to be on page 23 of your notes. This is when we set up limits describing what we're willing to allow or not to allow. And sometimes this is a good strategy for some of the issues we talked about. And sometimes when we talk about this stuff, I'm giving you a lot of information, and you take a piece of it here and a piece of it there, and you may refer to your notes down the road of something. Some of this isn't all going to pertain to you, and some of it takes a little bit longer to put into effect. But these are enforceable statements are setting limits for your kids. And one of the, I'm not going to, if you want to read, we'll look at part of this, but one of the key things is, does anybody have a stubborn child? Is anybody here a stubborn adult? So what is the first thing as a stubborn adult you don't want done to you?
I'll do the opposite.
That's exactly it. If you're a stubborn adult and somebody says to stop, you're going to go. If you're a stubborn child and somebody says to stop, you're going to go. There's something about that. So if you have a stubborn child, you want to use enforceable statements to set limits and not draw a line in the sand, because they're going to stick their toe over it every single time. So some of the enforceable statements, when you add this, there's a whole lot of stuff in here, but turn over to the next page and I'm going to read you some enforceable statements. And this, as you look at these, you're realizing that we're trying to eliminate the arguing and the back talking. So if you listen to some of these and you say, I give dessert to a kid who finishes their dinner, I was planning on spending $30 on your sneakers. If you can come up with the other two and $170, you can have the shoes you're asking for. You may drive the family car when you made a deposit of equally insurance deductible in my checking account. I'll read to you as long as your fingers aren't in your nose. Do you see what these statements are? They're just saying, you may keep the toys you pick up. They're statements that you're not being mean or rude. You're setting a limit of what you're going to allow. Dinner is served at 7. You might want to eat enough to hold yourself till breakfast. I am happy to do extra things for you as long as I feel you treat me with respect. You can go online. So you don't let me do anything. You can go online as long as you are right here where I can supervise you. So it's an enforceable statement is saying what you're going to allow, and you're not dictating. So you're like, I'll call the police if I find drugs in my home. I'll allow kids to attend concerts when I can go along with them or another adult I trust. As we talked about last week, I'll give snacks to kids who brush their teeth. Or maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself. So do you see how some of those can work? Do you see how that could work in a situation your child wants a $100 pair of tennis shoes, and you said, I was planning on spending $30. You coming up to the other $70? I'm happy to buy those for you. Or you've got a child who won't finish their dinner, and then everybody else gets dessert, and they don't get one. I'm happy. You've got to stay strong, though, moms and dads. I'm happy to you can have dessert too. I give it to children who finish their dinner. That'll work if you stay strong. But if they whine and beg and complain, then and you give in, then that's not gonna work. I will listen to you and talk with you in your voice as quiet as mine. So some of these sound like me, some of them may sound like you, but you can come up with a statement that works for your family. And think about the issues where it's the most arguing, where they're trying to convince you of something, or they won't eat dinner. I'm playing a game, I'll come and eat dinner later. dinner is served at 7. I'm serving dinner at 7. If you choose not to eat, breakfast is at 7 a.m. Kitchen's closed. I used to tell my kids the kitchen closed. It's, we had dinner or dessert. Kitchen's closed at 7. We're not going back in there. So you do what works for you, but think about the statements that you could use that really could relieve that arguing and that complaining. You just tell them, this is. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but this is how we do it here. And they may not like it. So when you set those limits, think about that stubborn child, that child who's going to do the opposite of what you tell them. So you're not telling them, you need to eat dinner right now. You're saying, dinner's at 7, and you can choose to eat if you choose to. As long as you can deal with the consequences that you're not going to feed them in 2 hours when they start crying that they're hungry. And that works for littles and bigs. So if you set the time that you're going to serve dinner, and that's teaching them to respect you, respect time limits, those kind of things carry on into life when they're, in somebody else's house or staying with somebody else. You want them to have good manners. You want them to set those guidelines that'll work for the houses or the people they live with. And if you wanted, this is a really generic, enforceable statement that is really easy to use without remembering all those details. You can start it with, you may, or I allow, or feel free. And then you fill in the blank. Feel free to go to your friends. Feel free to watch TV now. Feel free, or you may. As long as it doesn't cause a problem for me or anyone else in the universe. And because you're saying you can allow them, you may have your friend over today, as long as it doesn't cause a trouble for me or anyone else. If they start fighting, the friend goes home. Because you've set the ground rule that they can do it. You can watch TV with your brother as long as you're not fighting. And so when they start fighting, they know you've set that, and so you go in there, and they're like, well, we're not fighting, or he says attention, you can't do that, and mom says turn it off. You say turn it off, they won't turn it off. You say, no problem, I'll take care of it. So you say no problem, take care of it. Eventually they turn it off, we get to go to bed. The next day the kids come home from school, there's no TV. Because it was a problem. You told them what to do. You told them that there was going to be no more if they were going to fuss and complain. So you said no problem. You let them think everything was fine, because remember we talked about last week, discipline doesn't happen the moment the crime happens. Discipline that's a little bit delayed makes the kids wonder a little bit more about, what are they up to? So do you think the next time you say, no problem, I'll take care of it, you're going to be thinking, what in the world is going on now? What am I going to lose, or what benefits, or there's going to be no dessert? Each one of your child is completely different. They all have different ways they get to you, and if you have more than one child, you know that each one of your children is completely different. But if you take on some of these, you give an enforceable statement, and they don't follow it, and you say, no problem, I'll take care of it. That may be no problem. No, you can't use my key. You can't use my car anymore. You're going to have to take the bus today. Or whatever it is, little big or no problem. Those brand new tennis shoes you wanted to have and you wore in the mud, well, we put those away for a while, and you'll wear these other ones. You're not doing anything, your kids will act like you've committed a major crime, but you have told them ahead of time, and that's what they're going to be learning. You've got a boss that tells you ahead of time what you need to have done. You can choose to do it or not, but you choose to do it or not, it may mean your job. So if you have a child who needs to be told, this is what's going to happen if this is not done, and they choose to do it or not, you need to show them consequences, because that's how they learn. And these are little consequences. You take away their phone, you take away their PlayStation, they have to go to bed a half an hour early, whatever your consequences are. But you need to be enforcing those, because you have to remember that's how they're learning. And that's how they're going to make good choices, and they're going to make good decisions, and they'll be able to follow instructions when they get older. And that's what we really want, right? And we want to quit nagging, and quit reminding and give warning. I told you so. I'm gonna, if you do it again, just one more time, I'm gonna. We need to say, when you cross that line, you're gonna go sit in timeout. Whatever your consequence is, but resist the urge to nag and complain. Set some enforceable statements that you can enforce, and then let those go, and let them learn from those. Whether it's the same thing over again, over and over again. Okay, so let's go to page 26. And this is just a little bit of an exercise. I want you to think about some of the times your kids, you can, what's your unenforceable? Brush your teeth. Unless you stick your hand in your kid's mouth, you can't really force them to brush their teeth when they get too big. Don't roll your eyes. Can you make them quit rolling their eyes? Stop spending time playing video games. Go to sleep. I mean it. So what could be some enforceable statements we could use with those examples? This is your... Now, if you say, you will not, that's direct order. So what we say, I will talk to children who don't roll their eyes.
I just asked her if she does something like, I said, is there something wrong with your eyes? No, mommy. That's what I thought.
Mhm.
And I'll leave that at that.
Yeah.
Do it again. But I don't do anything.
But an
I bring it to her.
But an enforceable statement is something you're like, I will talk with children who don't roll their eyes. I will speak with children who show me respect. And I think, and eye rolling to you is not respect. So what would you say? Stop spending all your time playing video games. What could be an enforceable statement with that? What if you gave a time limit?
About what?
Video games are played in this house between 3 and 7. Or video games are played in this house for a total of 1 hour. What's your limit? What would you like it to be? Set your enforceable limit. Video games will be played in this house for an hour in the afternoon when your homework's done. And if they don't, what do you say? No problem. I'll take care of this. And so you decide you decide ahead of time. Parenting is not just parenting the second that it goes wrong. Parenting is thinking about the consequences, or thinking about what your consequences are going to be when the behavior arises. Because when we get right to it, then we're flustered, or we're like, oh, I knew I was supposed to say something. But think about, the other one, go to sleep. I mean it.
No, go to sleep tomorrow morning. If you don't get up, that's your problem. If you sleep too bad.
And that's,
We go through that. I'm like, get up.
well, I think you're right.
Get up.
Well, and I think the enforceable statement is that your child, the natural consequence to her behavior is that she's going to be tired. Now, if she wants to be tired every day, 5 days a week, the consequences that is the consequences. So you let it go. You can go in your room. It is now time to sleep. You go in the room, the light is turned off, and you go into bed. Whether you choose to go to sleep or not is up to them, but now it's time for you to go to bed and turn all the lights off. So the natural consequence is the one we don't want them to suffer. She's going to be tired all the next day. If she's going to be tired, sort of like, would you like to wear your coat or carry it? I'm not bringing my coat. And we're thinking, you're going to be freezing. Well, it'll be freezing one day. It's not that cold here. But I think you think about those statements that you are enforceable, or we want them to suffer those consequences. So we keep, a lot of times we lecture and lecture and lecture, like teeth brushing. Nobody wants their child to go to school with their teeth all yellow, because it reflects on us. And we don't like that. But if they go to school yellow and they're bad as breath, and a couple of their friends say to them, "Ay, ay," they would think about it. Is that a natural consequence? It's sort of like letting them dress themselves, and you're like, okay, well, you can't wear that and that. Why can't they? Why can't they? If it's appropriate school, why can't they? And if their friends make fun of them, or then they get to school and they're like, oh, what did they learn something? Did they learn something? Would they have learned something from you going, don't go change your clothes right now, nobody's wearing that to school, everybody will, no. Because you're going to tell them not to do it, and they're going to do it. So think about those consequences that we don't want them to suffer.
Well, you do it one time, but then like with her, she'll wear a flowered skirt with stripes. I'm like, my mom's like, Michelle, she's not matching. I'm like,
Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And least of all the
I'm
teachers.
out of it. And her dad's like, Mia, your shoes. I'm out of it. Deal with it. She'll get the consequences. Okay, fine. I'm done.
But I think that's where we get so caught up in controlling and thinking we need to control. Well, they need to learn to dress themselves. And some people, you see them on the street every day. Some people do, some people don't. But if we nag at them all the time when they're little, when they get to be an adult, they either have fashion sense or they don't. It's not a big deal. I think we just
be yourself. Just
be
express
yourself.
That's
And
all I
how do we build confidence in our kids? By supporting their good choices. Yes.
There's some points, like, my son's in their 20s, and I still don't want to see their drawers.
Oh, no.
For me, there's some places where I don't really care about you dressing yourself. I'm not going to watch you walk out my house with your underwear.
Right. And that's your enforceable statement. But what they put on over it that it's appropriate, if they're covered, then that's fine. But you're not going to, if they're like my child's not going to go to school with too short or because there's guidelines. My child doesn't go out. There's things appropriate clothes I will purchase for her, or I won't because I don't. And that's my, you're not going to wear that because I'm not going to spend my money on it.
When you say draws, that's like the sagging thing you're talking about?
Yep.
Maybe with it.
Yep.
I'm talking about your underwear.
Underwear.
I'm talking about you walking around with your
No,
underwear.
socks
You know
are-
these
Oh,
boys
I can't. Oh,
Yeah.
wear your drawers. So
Yeah.
when you up, they don't wear your underwear.
I would have the biggest wedge uniform about the boys my dad. Oh, God.
So I'm keenly aware. I'm just saying that I was just want to make sure there's
Yeah.
a point
No.
because I am now. I'm very comfortable with you dressing yourself. There are just certain
Yeah.
things that it's like, this is an
Fads.
inappropriate line with my sons. Like,
Yeah.
you need to cover your underwear.
That's right. Better bring it to the right there.
And I think and that's with our kids. There's appropriate things that we, not all of us allow our children to dress the same way. We allow our children, they'll say, well, so-and-so's wearing that, so-and-so's wearing that. That's fine. In my home, we will wear this. And so that's your guideline. You don't get caught up in what everybody else is doing. You set the guidelines that are that reflect your family's morals and standards. Definitely. All right, and visual 3-4 on page 28 says kids will always come to need the same number of warnings and reminders that are given. That makes sense. Doesn't mean they know you're going to yell at them 50 times. They're going to need 50 times to get it done. So when we can come up with an enforceable statement that says, this is what I mean right now, then that's what we mean right then. So does that sound like it's easy to apply?
Sometimes the solid treatment is worse, better than that. You just go, what's wrong, Mama? You're in the wrong. I'm just being honest. She's like, Mommy, you're not talking to me. Right?
I have a question.
Well, I love you too much to argue with you. Yes, ma'am.
My nephew, he's one of those that he got to have the last word.
Oh, thank you.
So I started ignoring him. So he's at the point, I said, we're not going to talk about it now. I don't want to talk about it now. I'm mad. I don't want to talk to you right now. So he says, okay. So he goes on and so he said, we got in a car. This was yesterday. He said, well, can we have a compassionate, emotional conversation now? And I said, no, I don't want to talk to you. So we went on. So after we drove around, we were on our way home, and I told him, I said, you know what? I said, you are a prince. I said, you really can be a king. I said, because we go to church and Jesus said you're a king. I said, you can have all the privileges of being a king. I'm the queen, you're the prince and the king.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and when you do that, you get a lot of privileges. You're treated like royalty. I said, but when you don't do what I tell you to do, or you do stuff you don't have no business, I'm the warden, you're the prisoner. He put you where you want to be. And he was like, well, I guess I'm feeling like a prisoner right now. I said, so when I told him, I said, it's your choice. You could be the king or you could be the prisoner. And I'm the warden of the queen. It's your choice.
And that is,
Can I add to that? With her nephew, he doesn't want to be the prisoner because he came to our after-school program today. He came like a king today. He was not playing. What do you need? Okay, be quiet.
And that's exactly it. It's having like your statements. What you're speaking to them. You're not letting them argue. They're knowing that you have made this is your enforceable statement. I am the queen, and this is how I'll be treated. And so you've given them that's the enforceable statement that works for you, or I will be the warden. So that child knows. And the next time you can say, warden or queen, and it's a one or two words. So like saying to your kids, I can take care of this, no problem. All you have to say is warden or queen, and your nephew knows what's up.
It's funny you mentioned a ward because that's what they call me in the house. I'm the ward, right? What keeps still? I mean I don't care.
Well, and we all have roles in our families. We all do. And I think reading 3, if you will turn to page 29. And this just talks, I'm going to have you, we talk about it briefly, but I'll just read through it if you need it. It's a strategic training session. Talking about you're taking your child someplace where they want to go, doing something they want to do. What is your session to teach your child that your yes means yes and your no means no? How are you, put together a plan. Put together a plan. What's the consequences to behavior? Does the child stay out too late? Does the child talk back? Won't get up in the morning? What's the something that really causes conflict in your house? Because there's something that may not happen every day, but it'll happen. What's your plan when that happens? Think about your plan. And ensure you have the support from other adults involved. If it's a spouse, it's a roommate, or if it's your mom or something like that, who could help you enforce this? Or you can tell them about it and they'll say, okay, but that might not work because of this. What's your plan to get your kids to start doing or stop doing? Set enforceable limits. We do extra things with kids who are acting nicely. You may watch television as long as you don't end up arguing. I take kids fun places as long as they're fun to be around. You may have blank as long as you are blank. So think about setting those limits when those times come. Plan a little ahead. We plan ahead, we read a recipe before we go to cook it. We plan ahead, we go to shop for it, then we figure out, plan ahead with your kids. What's the strategy we're going to use when this behavior comes up again? Don't nag or remind. I told you you could go shopping with me as long as you don't cause any problems. The problem starts the next time. I'm sorry. Last time we went shopping, you caused a problem. You'll not be shopping with me until I decide that you've learned that lesson. And I think one of the reminders, it said one of the moms didn't take her daughter shopping one day because she said that was she left her home with dad or the babysitter or whoever. And she came home from shopping that day and had a great big ice cream cone. This is such a good ice cream cone. Well, do you know that's re-encourage the daughter the next time? She's like, Mom went shopping and she got ice cream. Next time I want to go shopping because then possibly we could get ice cream or a Starbucks or whatever your age kid is, an ice cream or something. But so the mom left the child home because she didn't behave the last time she was in the store, came home with an ice cream that she didn't share because she was good and she went to the store. So when you're teaching your children, these are enforceable. It's not being mean. The next time they can go to the store with you, and you'd love to have them with you. I love to spend time with my kids. I like it when they're with me. But I don't like it when they're nagging me, complaining me, and doing all that. So if I set these limits, our children are more enjoyable to be around. And don't we want our kids to be more enjoyable? You look at some people whose kids are just screaming out of control, and you can see the look in their eyes like, why did I even have kids? You were so sweet when you were little. And you hear people saying that to their kids, and you have to, what we tell our kids goes into their head. So when we say, you're such a brat, well, they're going to live up to your expectations. You never listen to me.
How about the black sheep?
Or you're the black sheep. When we use those statements with our kids, it's sort of like we remember the statements our parents used with us that maybe were hurtful. You're not quite as fast as your sister. You're not quite as smart as your brother. If you could do it like, so we think about some of those things that kind of keep going through our minds and think about, I call my kids cherubs. They're not always cherubs, but I always call them cherubs. Because I just think that if that they're angelic and they're not, but don't ever want to refer to them in front of them if they're a brat or if they're being stubborn or if they're being this, because they'll live up to your expectations every time.
And I'm gonna tell you honestly, and I understand you're but all my life, I have a twin brother, okay, and I'm literally the darkest of the family, okay, black. Anyway, my mom always said you're a black sheep of the family, so I really did live up to that, and I'm not gonna lie. So I'll say, hey, I'm a black sheep.
Well, and what you've learned
Man, I
from
got
that,
in trouble. Well, not bad stuff, but
but what we've learned from
And I
that, what
lived up
you've
to
learned
that.
from that, is
and it
that
stayed in my mind.
we have to be careful what we say because you know we can't ever take words back. I know all of us remember something that was said to us that
I mean,
hurt
I
our
love my
feelings.
parents, don't
No,
get me
no,
wrong.
and your children are gonna love you too.
But
but
it's stuck
we-
in my head.
it
So
comes
when I
out
do
of our
something
mouth,
I'm supposed
you're
to do,
such a
I'm
brat.
like,
You're such a brat, or you're such a this, or you're such a diva, or you're such a whatever we throw out that they
Right.
are
it's true.
goes into their
It
head.
does.
And once you spit it out, you can say you're sorry, you can build them up, but once it's out there, you cannot take it back. Cannot take it back. So just thinking about what those
Innuendo.
your enforceable statements are. Think about the consequences to behaviors that you're going to run into this week. And if you have, does anybody have little bits? Like 2-year-old? I'm going to give this to you really quick, just because when you have little tiny ones, and I have a little granddaughter, but when little ones, you can't use the same strategy with. So one of the strategies with little ones is when they do something they're not supposed to. Looks like we're going to have to go into timeout. You know, it's not, they know what they're doing. You can't see, they know, if you've told them, keep your cereal on your tray, keep your toys in the backyard. If you use the and then a consequence, we're going to go have to time out. I'm sorry, you're going to have a fit until you can stay calm. You can stay in your room until you can stay calm. But the is not like yelling and screaming. It's a calm statement. You go, looks like somebody's going in timeout.
I'll say you going to that.
But using that, if you try and you tell them if they're old enough, you can go ahead and have a fit, but you can come out when you're sweet.
Now I will tell you, I know there's some parents in here thinking like me. The timeout is what you get when I got through with you. So I'm saying for the parents is over there thinking it like
No,
they all sitting like, oh, I got time.
I got your time out right here. Oh no, it wasn't no time out.
And not that every situation is warranted.
Right.
You go time out. Right
Yeah,
here.
I hear you.
Yeah, and honestly, I understand a lot of the techniques, and they're simply techniques.
Right.
We have a philosophy that says chew up the meat and spit out the bones. In other words, what applies, what doesn't apply, throw it out, because I have a very strong-willed baby boy. That wouldn't have worked for him.
And he's a thinker.
And he's a thinker.
Oh
so
my God, that's
he
my
was
love.
always ahead of us in his logic, in his thinking. He was, I have to have the last word. And so we really had to devise a way. How do we discipline? How do we deal with this kid according to the bent, the personality
Right.
that God has created in him? Because timeout, that wouldn't work for our baby boy. We had to figure out something
Yeah,
different.
and
What
you're
y'all
exactly right. And I think what Love and Logic tries to get away from is what we see, or what I see often, is just out of frustration, we smack. And we smack, and we hit. And we're not teaching our child. I mean, there are times, of course there are times your child needs spanking. And I realize that, and mine have had spankings. But what we tend to be as a culture, and you see it, is just we smack and we smack, because as opposed to taking the time to set some limits on our kids that can handle, but there is a time for that, and I understand. All of us have different kids, and some of mine may have needed a spanking, and a couple of mine have never had one, because they just didn't warrant it. But the behavior we want to see is, if you need to spank, spank. Don't ever spank when you're angry. That's when the news gets a hold of you, and that's when CPS gets a hold of you, and that's just not acceptable. We need to stay. But if we can use some of these techniques to tone down some of the behaviors, then we're going to have a relationship with our child as opposed to I can't stand to be with this kid because he won't listen to me and da 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 da. So yeah, take what you can use, and if you have any questions, I'll be back in a couple weeks. We'll have a couple more sessions. But thank you so much. I hope that we were able to come up with some sessions or some strategies or just some new ways to look at parenting, and hopefully we'll enjoy our kids more this week.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Before you leave,